You know, I've always had this fascination with bats, and I really think a lot of people do too. Just think about all those movies. You've got the vampire movies and all those Batman movies. It goes on and on. Where I live in Austin, Texas, we have the largest urban colony of Mexican free-tailed bats. It's believed there's over 1.5 million bats living under the Congress Avenue Bridge. Now, you heard me right, 1.5 million. Now, at dusk, it's really the sight to see. You see them as they emerge from under the bridge and they fly along the river in this big, long, kind of dark ribbon looking thing of bats. Now, did I say 1.5 million? In today's episode, Merlin Tuttle joins me. He's a world renowned bat expert. He's the founder of Merlin Tuttle's Bat Conservation. He even has a commemorative U.S. postal stamp. He's got one of the top 100 photos, and the list goes on and on and on. Since an early age, Merlin has been working with bats. His story is one of those that's just really astounding. In high school, he started studying bats with the support of his family, and he debunked long-held theories of bats. Get this one. He and his mom actually drove to the Smithsonian with no appointment. But with his enthusiasm, he was able to show what he had observed. Now, because of all that, he has now been all over the world working with bats, and his expertise tells us just how important these bats are. Not only do they save farmers millions of dollars with the insects they eat, the fruit bats pollinate all kinds of species, and here's some really cool tidbits. Bats are not blind. You know that saying, blind as a bat? Well, guess what? That doesn't work anymore. Did you know if there's enough mosquitoes that are around, bats can eat up to over 1,000 mosquitoes an hour? And the Mexican free-tailed bat, the one that we have here in Austin, can fly up to almost 100 miles an hour. Now, we got into so much in this episode, we actually ran out of time. Now, one more really important thing you needed to know. Agave plants. You know the ones that we get tequila from? My favorite, by the way. Without bats, maybe no tequila. No bueno, says me. Anyways, sit back, get ready, because this modern day Batman is going to tell us how bats actually can save the day.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange, losses and games from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the For Real podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of really having a great guest, Merlin Tuttle. Merlin, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Mark. I'm delighted to be here.
I am so excited to have you here for so many reasons. One is that you're a fellow Austinite. So from the Austin crowd out there, we've got somebody that lives with us and, of course, is protecting the bats at the bridge here. But Merlin, really, I know you're really busy and taking the time. It really means a lot to me being on today. I thought what we would do is, and I've done some of my homework. I want to dig into a little bit about you, how you got started with bats and that. I've read some of the stuff, so I've got some questions. But just to introduce you to the audience, can you kind of go back in time and how you got started with bats and kind of move forward from there?
Frankly, I don't know that I would call myself one who is in love with bats. I very much respect and appreciate bats and understand that without lots of them present, we ourselves are jeopardizing our survival.
Sure.
If I was too emotionally in love with them, I don't think I'd do a good job of conserving them. People who get too emotionally involved with animals sometimes have a hard time dealing with realities of modern world situations.
Sure. So how old were you though when you started looking at bats and you I guess you became a fascination with you and obviously really guided the rest of your life pretty much at some point.
Well, I can remember back to when I was just in the fifth grade in California when a fellow student brought a bat to school that she'd found. It was a free-tailed bat that had been found dead somewhere. I was interested in small mammals by the time I was age 9. In fact, I was preparing what we call museum study skins and trading with museums by that time. But I was fascinated then, and I remember seeing a hoary bat and California myotis on different outings in California, but I never really got hooked on bats until my family moved to Tennessee, and I lived only a couple miles from a bat cave. And when friends told me about that there were bats there, I was immediately curious. My father and I went over to see the bats, and the first time we were there in the daytime and went in, uh, probably not a good idea in terms of the bats, but we didn't know any better. And we followed the droppings on the floor to figure out where they were going in the cave. And it was like following breadcrumbs. So we finally got to this narrow little passage that they apparently were going through into a bigger room on the other side where they were roosting. I crawled through the passage with my arms pinned up in front of me. It was a fairly small passage. And very unexpectedly, when my headlight came on bright as I was reaching the far end, it panicked hundreds, maybe even 1,000 bats. And they all decided to get out at once. Well, this is like yelling fire in a theater.
Sure.
Everybody piles up at the door. And I ended up covered in bats. They were in my shirt. They were crawling around my head. They were just frantic to get out. But, I never was reared to be the kind of kid that feared nature.
Obviously.
By the time I was 5 years old, I was inadvertently terrorizing my mother by bringing snakes into the house and having them get loose in the house. So I was very calm, actually, knowing that they weren't going to hurt me, and I just didn't want to move so that I didn't crush one of them. But they finally got out, and I got out. And later we came back to watch them emerge, and I was very fascinated, especially when we found out that they were coming only in the spring and fall to that cave. But my field guide, where I'd identified them, said that they lived in one cave year round, that they were non-migratory. And in fact, that's what all the books that talked about that species at that time said. And so I was seeing something totally different. The bats didn't read the books. They were coming only in the spring and fall. They had to be migrating, going somewhere else. So I prepared a couple of them as study specimens and got my mother to drive me to the Smithsonian where I could talk to mammal specialists who wrote some of the books. And I ended up going to the Smithsonian and asking to see, at 17 in those days, we didn't have cars and drive.
Yeah.
But my mother took me to the Smithsonian, and we just went. We didn't even have an appointment. We just went to the main desk and asked to see somebody who knew a lot about bats. And Dr. Handley was head of the mammal section, and he was a bat specialist, and so he came down. And I don't think you'd get that kind of attention anymore either.
No.
But he came right down and was fascinated as could be when he found that I had field notes and study skins and knew what I was talking about.
Merlin, a 17-year-old guy talking to somebody at Smithsonian, I'd be fascinated by you too.
Well, so he ended up spending about a half a day showing me around different kinds of bats that he had studied in Latin America. And then he introduced me to people in his same department who had bat bands available, and they gave me a couple thousand bat bands and said, "Why don't you go try to band these bats and see where they go?" And so I took the bands home and right away managed to catch several hundred and banded them. And then an incredible stroke of luck, I still marvel at how unlikely it was. Within just a matter of a couple months, I was 115 miles north of where I banded them, curiously looking for bats in caves, my father and I, but not expecting to ever see any bat that I'd seen before, and came upon banded bats. And I couldn't believe they were mine. I assumed that somebody else banded them, and so I wrote down some of the numbers and decided that when I got home, it'd be fun to see who banded them and let them know. I got home and I found out that I was the one that banded them.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And so it turned out that that cave contained one of America's most important remaining bat hibernation sites with hundreds of thousands of bats. And I ended up having some incredible experiences at that cave, but I presume that's enough of my how I got started.
Well, I mean, obviously you were destined to do this thing. Obviously your thought process, it's amazing that a kid at that age really kind of wanted to find that stuff out. I think it's just really cool. Wish I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. So anyway, so let's move forward. So you go to school, and then at this point, at what point do you really start immersing yourself in the bat world other than this one time when you were 17?
First of all, after college, well, actually, even during college, I was hired by the American Museum of Natural History to collect for them in Central America. And then I built a reputation as a field collector. And since I was breaking all previous records for finding rare animals that they wanted, the Smithsonian hired me away, gave me a better deal. And then and actually it was Dr. Handley, the one that I first met at 17, that gave me the better deal. And actually I ended up co-directing a $400,000 project. And we were studying all mammals from bats to jaguars at that time, but I was especially interested in bats. But when I got through with doing that for 2 years, I went on to graduate school. And when I went to graduate school, that's when I first came back and started really intensively studying gray bats. I decided to work on them for my doctoral thesis and ended up banding more than 42,000 of them.
Wow.
And I tracked them, made about 20,000 recoveries over a 20-year period, tracked them to hundreds of locations, found that they were one of the longest migrating bats of that kind in America. And, I tracked bats from northern Alabama almost into Virginia, down to Florida, out to Arkansas and Missouri, east to North Carolina. And so it ended up being the longest term, most thorough study probably ever conducted on a bat, at least involving migratory and local movements.
When you were in Knoxville at that time, did you ever go down in Alabama? There's an area called Montesano, by any chance? Just out of curiosity.
I don't remember that name, but I worked a lot in Alabama. When I was working on my PhD on gray bats, I was headquartered in near Scottsboro in northern Huntsville.
Yeah, that's where I was. It was in Huntsville, actually, where Montesano was, and I lived there when I was a kid, like in 4th and 5th grade, and there was a huge park there, and there were all kinds of caves there, and I remember some bats being there as a kid, crawling around and all those things, doing that thing. I was just curious if that was one of the places you were actually chasing your bats at.
The most important remaining bat hibernation cave known anywhere in the world is not too many miles from Huntsville.
Oh, really?
That's right.
That's wild.
It's not one. It's not one you'd have just happened to go in though. When the cavers discovered what happened is the cavers discovered one of my banded bats in this cave, but they had discovered the cave up on a mountaintop in the summertime when the bats weren't there. These bats were millions of bats come there to hibernate, but they're not there in the summer. So they saw only a few bats, but they grabbed that one band and reported it. And when they described the cave, I immediately suspected that it was an incredibly important site. They had a hard time believing it because they didn't see many bats there. But I was on the phone within hours, practically begging them to take me into that cave. They didn't want to do it because I hadn't had any, quotes, vertical roping training, and you had to rope off a 50-foot drop to get to the entrance and then 105 feet vertical free fall drop to get in. And then you crawled through a little passage and dropped another 75 feet.
Wow.
So they didn't think a novice should be doing that. But I finally promised to sign my life away and everything else, and told them that I wasn't the panicky type and I didn't need a whole bunch of training, that I'd get by fine. And so I got them to take me in. And when we finally went in the wintertime, it was absolutely amazing. It's that the inside of that cave is still one of the most amazing sights on the planet in the winter when all those bats show up.
That's wild.
But that's only, I think, probably 30 miles or so from Huntsville.
Yeah, we were right in Huntsville, and that Montesano it wasn't really a mountain. It was a big hill, but it was kind of like a mountain. As a kid, it felt like a mountain. I'm sure if I went there now, it'd look like a little hill. But it had a great park, and as a kid, it was a great playground for me. Is what it was.
Yeah, I had caver friends that lived up on that ridge. Now I think about it.
Yeah, it was really, really fun, and you'd find these old fossils there, and there's so many things that were there. And most people that don't know much about Alabama, there's a lot of geological things there that most people aren't aware of.
Right.
For real, 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 for real.
And we'll be right back. We are supported by PrepVet, providing stem cell therapy for pets.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
So let's talk bats now. I mean, I know we've been talking about it, but let's talk bats specific. Like, for the audience, tell them. I know they're absolutely misunderstood completely, but I know there's a bunch of species. Can we talk about some of the species, and anything you can think that's bat centric for everybody, and then let's get into what you're doing for conservation and their importance of them and how they're misunderstood and all that. But let's just kind of talk to the audience a little bit about bats. I know there's a 1,400 species and that kind of thing, and how big some are and how little some are and all that kind of stuff.
Well, when I first became fascinated with bats, there are less than 900 species known. We're still discovering new species, and we're close to 1,500 now.
Oh, wow.
They come in an absolutely amazing variety, from giant flying foxes with almost 6 foot wingspans down to tiny bumblebee bats that weigh about the same as a U.S. penny.
That's crazy. It's kind of like a hummingbird.
There are snow white bats, there are jet black bats, there are bright orange bats, we have a bat here in Texas, the spotted bat, that has ears as long as its head and body combined, and they're pink translucent, and its wings are pink translucent, but its body on the backside is jet black with a perfect design of 3 white spots. It has a black collar, and on the belly it's snow white.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, it's one of the most spectacular mammals I've ever seen anywhere in the world.
You know, you said you mentioned flying fox. I didn't realize a flying fox was actually a bat. And there's you know, when I started digging into it, man, they're really cool looking. I didn't realize that they had a wingspan up to 6 feet. That's kind of scary.
There's no proof of one at 6 feet. There are known records of them 5.5 feet. I had a colleague years ago who had seen a lot of them, who believed that some really did probably reach 6 feet.
That's wild. And you've been all over the world with these things. So they're all different sizes, but let's talk about, you know, you always hear, and there's a lot of questions I have for you. I'm sure that, especially when you're doing conservation and the importance of them, you know, when you see the movies portray them as these evil, horrible things, I'm sure that doesn't make you very happy because and so let's talk a little bit about bats. You know, the big deal you always hear about is rabies and that, but let's get into a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the conservation and the importance they are to that.
Well, one of the things that everybody has heard at some time or another is that bats are mostly disease ridden. They're dangerous sources of rabies and almost any other scary disease you can think of. But the truth is that that's all greatly exaggerated. For example, I could truthfully tell you that most people who get rabies in America get it from a bat, but it's only 1 or 2 people in a year from all of the US and Canada combined. It's extremely rare. The chances of you getting rabies or any other disease from a bat are just about zero if you don't go around picking up sick ones and letting them bite you and then not telling the doctor.
Right.
Bats, you know, I have studied bats or photographed them in 45 countries. Everywhere where bats are very abundant, I've been. I've often been surrounded by literally millions in caves, and I've been working with bats now for roughly 65 years, and I have yet to be attacked. I have yet to see an aggressive bat. I have yet to contract a disease from a bat. Now, just like veterinarians, those of us who study bats get vaccinated against rabies because in handling thousands of animals, we're going to occasionally have one that gets frightened and bites in self-defense.
Sure.
And so just like veterinarians, we take a precaution against rabies, but the odds of being harmed, of getting any disease from a bat, are close to zero. The U.S. Congress allocated billions to find the source of Ebola when it was hot news. Most of that was spent trying to prove it came from bats, and they failed. It didn't come from bats, it came from primates, or at least that's the best evidence.
Right.
And in fact, the guy who was the dominant one scaring the public about that Ebola and SARS and a whole bunch of other diseases came from bats, after a several month congressional investigation with regard to the source of COVID, he was fired for his misinformation that he misled Congress and the public with.
So let's dig a little bit more into some of the fallacies, or the, you know, the fear-based media, I guess, is a good way of doing it. When you hear about all this stuff, let's talk about, One of the things I thought about when you're talking about when you're in that cave when they had them in your shirt and that, did you get scratched or anything from those things at all?
Not that I know of.
Not that you remember.
Well, you know, before, when I first started studying bats, it wasn't even known that a bat could have rabies. Rabies is so rare from a bat that it wasn't until the 1950s that we discovered that a bat could transmit rabies. I mean, if bats were a real threat of rabies, we'd have figured it out a long time before the 1950s or 60s.
Right. That makes sense.
But in that time, gray bats were very gentle, basically, but they were kind of, I'd call them polite, because if one of them was really pissed off and going to bite you, if you handled him, he would give a buzz like a bee. You get a certain wing beat change when a bee's after you. The bat would give you a certain buzz sound that you could hear. And when I would be having helpers band bats, I'd say, "Watch out for that guy over there. He's giving you the all bite sign. He's going to bite you if you touch him."
That well, like a dog. I mean, at the end of the day, you kind of know at some point, and you know,
Yeah, yeah. I handled so many bats, and because they didn't bite very hard, I didn't even pay attention. I was probably bitten thousands of times before we even knew that bats could have rabies.
wow.
But I don't recommend anybody be careless about any animal bite, but the odds of getting bitten by a bat that you didn't pick up first are almost zero.
What's funny is when I was doing my homework for today, I was reading a thing about bats and rabies, and man, they tell you if they get saliva on you, they get anything on them. Basically, it sounds like if you get near a bat, you're going to get rabies the way it is in the internet. That's why I wanted to talk about it because I had a feeling that's probably very grossly exaggerated.
Well, these exaggerations are common and they're lucrative.
Well, that makes sense too.
Just a few years ago, this is a story that happened right here in Austin. Someone went out on one of the tour boats and reported that there was a bat on the boat, and she was afraid that it might have bitten her without her knowing it, because they tell you when they're trying to scare you that you can be bitten without knowing it, and that the bites sometimes don't show, so you nobody can tell if you're bitten. So if you think you might have been, you better get the shots because you're going to die if you're wrong. Well, she thought she might have been bitten, but she had no evidence that the bat had even been close to her. The owner of the business, trying to be a gentleman, told her to go and go to the nearest emergency room and get checked out and send him the bill. He got a bill for more than $20,000.
Oh, you're kidding me.
What they do, I mean, this is done by even honest people, but it's certainly horrible the way it's perpetrated. You come in and you're in a room with a bat flying around, and they'll say, "Well, did you sleep in that room?" Oh, and especially if you slept in the room, the bat might have sneaked up and bitten you while you were asleep and you wouldn't know it. But it'd be a rare day a bat would bite me and I wouldn't wake up.
Well, why would it sneak up and bite you? I don't even understand.
Well, they're not going to. I mean,
Yeah.
back when I was doing lots of research on gray bats in caves, sometimes we actually slept overnight in a bat cave. We'd just go into a side room where they weren't roosting, and we never worried about a bat sneaking up and biting us in our sleep.
I know.
But they'll say, "Well, we don't see any marks or anything, but bat bites, their teeth are so small you can't see where they bit you, and if you probably weren't bitten, but if you were and we miss it and you don't take the vaccinations, you're going to die a horrible death. There's no saving you." And so, given that kind of speech, almost everybody is going to get vaccinated. Well, the vaccine that they give for post-exposure, they seem to charge very differently in different places. You can get it sometimes, maybe not anymore, for 10,000, but some places charge 50,000.
Yeah. As a kid, I remember I was riding my bike one time, and I don't know, I probably somewhere around second, third grade, and a dog came up and bit me, and so my parents didn't know if the dog had rabies shots, and so we had to drive around. My parents drove around, and it was up to, I think, the day of that I was going to have to get back in. I don't know if they still do that, where you get the shots in the stomach. Literally, they found that dog like the day I was supposed to start getting that series. I was just scared of the shots because I heard it's really painful. But I just, I went under the thing. So I can imagine there is a lot of money involved in that thing. And also there's a fear factor of getting a shot.
And it's not a dangerous or a painful vaccine.
Yeah.
In fact, veterinarians give probably a very similar vaccine to pets for, I don't know what they charge now, but last I knew years ago it was $50.
Right. Right in that range.
But for a human to get vaccinated against rabies, even if it's just for pre-exposure, that's, my staff tell me they're charged up to $500.
Of course. Our great medical system. So, a couple things that I read about, and I want to get into Austin and the bridge, and then everything else you're doing. I read that it's the only mammal that has sustained flight, which is cool. Because you got sugar gliders and things like that, but it's the only mammal with sustained flight. And that, I think, which bat is it that? And I think it may be the one that's here at the bridge. They can fly up to, they've been measured at like 100 miles an hour or something like that. That's insane.
Right. We usually say 100. It was actually 99, but
Rounded up.
if we can track one at 99, there are probably others doing 110 that we missed.
Yeah. 100 miles an hour. That is just wild. And is that the bats here in Austin? The ones we have in the bridge?
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. And then the other thing is they live pretty long. They're one of the longest living mammals. They live up to like 30 years or something.
41 or 2 at least.
Oh, wow. Even more than what I read. That's crazy.
In fact, it's very hard to know what the maximum lifespan of a bat is, because most of us who banded bats most people who band them don't do it before they're at least 20 years old. So if the bat lives 40 years, what are the odds that 40 years later you're going to still be going in caves looking for bats?
Right.
It'd have to be 60 years. You'd be at least that old. And then try to find, if you banded 10,000 bats on a given night and released them among 1.5 million at the bridge, what are your odds of finding one of those again right away?
Needle and haystack?
What are the odds of finding one 40 or 50 years later? I talked to a colleague researcher recently who he'd written a book about bats, and he said that they lived more than 50 years. And I thought he'd come up with some research that I didn't know about. So I called him and said, where did you get that number? He said, well, nobody has tracked a bat till, showed it to be 50 years old. But from what I've seen, I assume that they're probably living to be more than 50 years old. And we just, by the time that much time has passed, we don't usually find them again.
So it's an estimate. Tell me about the frog-eating bats, because I was under assumption the bats just mainly ate insects. So there's a frog-eating bat?
There are bats that eat possums and rats. There are bats that eat
Oh, wow.
Lizards. There are bats that eat frogs. In fact, one of the more interesting bats that I really like, it's a carnivore called a spectral bat, and it's the largest bat of the New World. It has about a 3-foot wingspan, and they've been watched with night vision equipment, and the male and the female take turns babysitting, and the one that goes out and hunts at the end of the night will come back carrying a rat or a small possum or a bird for its mate to eat. Uh, the bats like that appear to mate for life.
Oh,
But speaking of that kind of thing, just a few years ago, a study done in Europe uh, concluded that bats have social systems strikingly similar to those of primates, of higher primates.
really?
They adopt orphans, they help each other in need, they form long term relationships. Even in my banded bats that I had years ago, I couldn't miss the fact that sometimes I'd catch a dozen bats in a given cave and location, and then maybe 10 years later, I'd catch three of them still together 100 miles away.
Have they done DNA testing? You know, the way chimps are primates, are chimps actually are 98% like humans. Have they done the DNA testing on bats at all, but in that same kind of category at all?
There been a lot of testing done. Unfortunately, most of it's trying to prove bats are dangerous,
Right, of course.
when in fact, the only evidence that they're dangerous is the number of people speculating that they're dangerous.
Right.
There's big money in scaring people, and it's easy. If you're a virologist and you want to have it easy and get quick publications and sensational headlines, study bats. You can catch. I mean, there are caves here in this area where you could catch 1,000 in 15 minutes, and so you don't have any trouble with sample size. But if you're looking for disease in foxes or raccoons or almost anything else, it'd take you a long time to catch
Right.
even 100 of them.
Right. That makes sense.
But there are people that make a living scaring others about bats because they can get quick publications. They can speculate things that are really scary, and that gets newspaper headlines, and that gets promotion because you got papers published that were widely read because they're scary, and it's just a terrible cycle of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, of course.
You say bats are probably sources of disease, and like with COVID, lots of bats have been found that have coronaviruses that are related to COVID. But you can find coronaviruses related to COVID in humans.
Right.
I mean, coronaviruses are the source of common colds, and they say we examined these bats and we found a virus that's, in fact, the first one that they scared people with for SARS. They found it was like 86% or something like that related to the one that causes SARS. And I pointed out that we are more than 96% related to chimpanzees, and that we don't have any trouble telling ourselves from chimps.
True.
So saying that they found a virus that is related to one that's dangerous, they're all related at some level.
Sure. Well, that makes sense.
But they scare us into then forking over a lot of money to protect us from a danger that really doesn't exist, at least at a level that should concern us to spend billions of dollars looking for it.
Right. You know, one of the things I read, and tell me if that's true too. I know that you said there's up to 1,500 species. There's only really three that are vampire bats. Three species are actually vampire bats.
Right.
Yeah.
One of those feeds on mostly mammal blood, and the other two feed almost exclusively on bird blood.
And the mammal blood, are those the ones that go after like the cows and things like that? Is that?
Yeah, that's Desmodus rotundus,
Yeah. Yeah.
the common vampire. And those bats were rare until humans came to Latin America and cut down the rainforest and put cattle in pastures. Cattle are an easy and abundant food source for vampires,
Yeah.
and the population gets way out of bounds when you bring in a lot of easy feeding, easy to eat cattle that supply blood. And so years ago, when I was working for the Smithsonian, if we were out in virgin rainforest a long ways from the nearest humans, we almost never saw a vampire. Vampires were located where people had brought in livestock or something that they could feed on.
Well, let's move forward a little bit. So you moved to Austin specifically for the Congress Bridge, if I'm correct. And can you tell me that story? And for the people that don't live in Austin, talk about the bridge and what we have here and all that. And then let's talk about how important bats are to basically, in some ways, our survival. So let's talk about that.
Well, in the early 1980s, the Congress Avenue Bridge in downtown Austin was remodeled using box beam construction, and these big long beams can be lined up. Each one might be 18 inches. I don't know how wide they are, maybe 2 feet. And they're long, and you line them up side by side to make a bridge. And if you leave a space between them, that may be occupied by bats. But if you don't want bats in the bridge, you just don't leave any space between the box beams, or you leave spaces that are more than 2 inches wide, because bats don't like those wide spaces either, because predators can get them out. So under the Congress Avenue Bridge, when they remodeled it, they inadvertently put a fair number of the beams 3/4 to an inch and a half apart, which provided ideal opportunities for bats. Much of Austin is built over former bat caves, and the bats still have food, but no place to live. So when those crevices were opened up between the beams and the bridge, this was ideal alternative habitat for free-tail bats. The box beams are out of concrete, and they provide a perfect range of temperature for the bats. If the day weather is rather cool, they can move their pup up to near the top of the crevice, and the sun ray coming down from the pavement will provide more heat at the top so they can get warm. But if it gets really hot outside, they can move the pup down near the bottom and find it cooler.
Yeah.
And so the bats like that, and they started moving in by the hundreds of thousands. And at the time, I was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but I couldn't not hear the news about how there were news headlines countrywide that hundreds of thousands of rabid bats were invading and attacking the citizens of Austin. Made wonderful news. And I had just at that time decided to resign my research career and devote full time to conserving bats, because in my travels I was seeing how important bats were, and yet how ridiculously they were being exterminated by people who just didn't understand them. So when all this media started coming out from Austin, I came down to see what was going on, and I people were signing petitions at that point to have the bats eradicated. And I came to a very different conclusion. I concluded that those bats represented a gold mine of opportunity, and moved to Austin to headquarter my new conservation efforts. Most people would have thought I was insane. I mean, you're going to do bat conservation headquartered in a city where hundreds of thousands of rabid bats are scaring people. But it didn't take a lot of effort on my part to show people the reality. And in fact, now, some 35 or 40 years later, we still have had not a single person attacked by one of these bats. We haven't had anybody get a disease from these bats, but they have brought in about $200 million in tourism.
I would bet it's more.
I would bet it's more too, but I'm being very conservative.
Yeah, and for you guys that are listening, it's one of the tourist sites to see. It's actually real. It's less than a mile from my house, and every night, right around dusk, all these bats start flying out. And if you look down, and they fly along the river, and you look down the river, and you see this ribbon of bats that are just all going south, looking for hunting for mosquitoes, basically.
Our bats are world famous now.
It's crazy. Now, are they the same bats that I read about? And I'm not sure it's these guys or another one, but that can eat one bat eats 1,000 mosquitoes per hour.
No,
Okay.
that's a misinterpretation of something I probably said years ago.
Well, I love that idea. Eat as many as you can.
Well, bats only eat mosquitoes when they're available. They're not out there eating huge numbers of mosquitoes all the time because there's not mosquitoes available all the time. But they can significantly reduce numbers. That has been demonstrated. Our bats, they're going to, most of the time, they're probably feeding on moths and beetles that come off of crops. But let's not ignore the fact that bats in Texas, and largely this is probably coming from free-tailed bats, save Texas farmers $1.4 billion a year. We're using sophisticated DNA markers now to identify exactly what species of insects bats eat. And in most of our samples, we're finding mosquitoes. They do eat mosquitoes. And a small bat can catch 1,000 mosquitoes or more in an hour. There's no question about that. Even some of the largest bats in America have been found feeding heavily on mosquitoes. But a bat can catch 1,000 an hour, but he's not catching 1,000 every hour on very many nights because there's just not that many mosquitoes out most of the time.
Right.
So I'm a little careful how I want to state that. They are good at, they don't just eat mosquitoes, they scare moths that are among the worst pests of our yards and gardens. The moths actually listen for the bat echolocation and flee areas where they hear bats.
For real, 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 for real.
And we'll be right back. We are supported by PrepVet, providing stem cell therapy for pets.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
Now, I read, and tell me again, I know when I read stuff, it doesn't mean it's 100% true, that bats aren't blind like everybody think they are. I know they use, that's not true, correct?
There's not a blind species of bat on the planet.
Yeah, and that everybody, you grow up thinking they're blind and they're just listening to sonar, but that's not the case at all. Well, it's both.
They can see everything with sound alone except for color.
Wow.
Like if you show me a block of concrete, I cannot tell you by looking at it whether it's rock hard, whether it's hollow, whether it's balsa light. I can't tell you any of that. The bat can ping that with his echolocation and tell you whether it's solid rock or not.
Wow.
In fact, bat echolocation has been estimated to be more than 1 billion times more sophisticated than any similar system developed by humans.
That's incredible.
I'm told that our Navy uses knowledge from bat sonar in some of its most sophisticated efforts.
I think I read something about that. But let's talk about conservation. We're talking about the pollination and all the other things they're doing. And also, talk about that and your conservation, because we want to save these. We want to save them for a variety of reasons. Let's talk about that and what is threatening them now. And there's some obvious reasons, but let's talk a little bit about that so you can help educate people out there too, to how to protect these guys that we thought were such bad guys.
Well, bats have declined really alarmingly throughout America. Species that were once kind of the nocturnal equivalent of passenger pigeons by day are now on the endangered list. Right here in Texas, one of our bats, the cave myotis, we don't see them because they come out later at night than the freetails and don't usually do it in big numbers in a single place. But our cave myotis, they live in fairly small Texas caves. And when I first came down here, I visited some caves and concluded that had anyone studied the status of that bat, it would be on the endangered list. And many years later, decades later, they've declined dramatically from what they were then, and they're still not on an endangered list. To get on an endangered list, you need to be popular enough with enough people concerned about you to at least go out and conduct a census to figure out how the species is doing now versus yesterday or the year before. I did that for gray bats, and we concluded that they were critically endangered. In fact, when I started my career, they were declining so rapidly that leading experts were predicting that they would soon become extinct. And yet, today we have millions more than when their extinction was predicted, and that's because my research project identified what their basic needs were, and we educated the public and cavers and others that were misinformed that had been killing the bats. There's a lot of hope if we just do the right things. We can live in harmony with bats as we demonstrate here in Austin. But for example, our cave myotis here in this state, they live in relatively small caves. They're inconspicuous, and I know of a number of instances where caves have been just bulldozed over. You know, if it's a small one, you can't even blame a developer for not knowing that a small cave can be important. They just bulldoze over them. There are buildings and parking lots here in Austin that are on top of former bat caves. So you can lose 30, 40, 50,000 cave myotis in a single incident. And we don't even keep track of how many of these small caves get lost. You can't commercialize them. They're not big enough, and people don't realize that they have importance. In another area, free-tailed bats are known to be especially vulnerable to wind turbines, particularly when they're pregnant. And there are hundreds of thousands of bats killed annually in wind turbines from careless operation in Texas. There's no question that far more bats than are generally recognized are killed in these turbines. I went to a turbine site one time to investigate with company officials, and when we got to the first site where we're going to investigate, and we announced to the local manager that we were there to check on bat kills, and he kind of laughed and said, "Well, you're wasting your time here. We've never seen a bat kill here." And I, at that point, happened to look down, and 4 feet in front of me was a dead bat that had been killed by a wind turbine. In addition to this kind of thing, if we don't educate people to overcome their fear, they're intolerant of having bats anywhere near them.
Right.
I remember a family in Florida that owned the biggest remaining bat cave in that part of Florida. And when I told them about their bats and the need to protect them, their response was just the opposite. Oh my God, we didn't know we had something like that. We got children. Those caves are full of rabid bats. And I wasn't able to persuade them to not destroy the cave, but I did persuade them that they would give me. Well, I asked the guy if he ever read National Geographic magazine. Oh yeah, we're members. And so I said, well, would you agree to leave the cave alone for just the next few days until you check and see what National Geographic says about bats? And he actually had the book Wild Animals of North America, where I wrote the chapter on bats. And it was really comical. When I came back, he had figured out that I'd written the chapter on bats for National Geographic. And he was so thrilled. He took his family up to the cave to watch bats with me.
Oh, that's funny.
And they ended up donating the cave to the Nature Conservancy to be protected.
Education. So let's talk about, you mentioned this earlier, but let's go a little bit deeper in this, the importance of it. Let's talk about how they're helping the farmers and pesticides and all that and money, as well as the cross-pollination that they do as well.
There was a recent paper published in the journal Science showing that especially in the northeastern U.S., where an introduced fungus has recently killed millions of bats, nowhere near all of them, but a lot of them, agricultural use of pesticides has increased in those areas by 31%. And this has cost billions of dollars of crop losses and even mortality of people who are exposed to the increased application of pesticides. If you go just south of our border, you find in Mexico that tequila and mezcal are produced from agaves that are heavily dependent upon bats for pollination.
I knew I loved bats for a reason.
So that's billions of dollars of value that would be lost, not to mention your margaritas.
Yeah, absolutely.
If bats weren't around. In fact, bats are the original pollinators of some of the world's most important food plants for people. They all commercial bananas came from ancestors that were bat dependent for pollination. And we're seeing right now a terrible fungal disease that's gotten into commercial bananas, threatening their future. And producers are having to scramble trying to come up with bananas that are resistant. And to do that, they need genes from the ones that are still pollinated in the wild by bats.
Wow, that's interesting.
There are many examples. I mean, the most valuable, the most sought after fruit of Southeast Asia, the durian.
Durian, sure.
Is bat pollinated, worth billions of dollars a year.
You want to? I got a side little trivia thing that's not related to bats, but it's on durians. You know, the durians kill more people than like almost anything. Seriously,
Falling on their heads.
Yeah, it's true.
I'll bet they can't beat coconuts though.
I just read an article about, because I've been over in Malaysia where, that's it's the smelliest thing ever.
Right.
But I read an article just like this week about it. It falls on people. It kills more people than almost, I think, any other plant or something like that. It's crazy.
Yeah. One of the statistics I used to cite was that you're more likely actually in America to be killed by a falling coconut than by a disease from a bat.
Wow. Well, maybe the percentage is a little bit different with the durian then.
Well, the durian may kill more people than coconuts just because people are attracted, because it's a very sought after fruit.
I don't get it. It's the smelliest thing I've ever smelled in my life.
Well, your taste can be altered.
Yeah.
Uh, it's interesting. My wife, the first time she tried a durian, she thought it was horrible. And after trying it a couple times, she ended up liking them.
Well, as long as you get a clothespin on your nose, I think you can eat them pretty good.
But bats have other effects on almost all of our food production. Take, for example, rice. Where would the world be without rice? And yet, in study after study, it's been shown that bats are saving major amounts of rice production from losses to pests. At one cave that I got protected in Thailand, the bats from just that one cave after they recovered were found to be worth $300,000 a year to local rice growers just in controlling a single pest, and they do a lot more than that.
One of the things it may have been on your website that I read, which was kind of a side benefit that you don't really think about it, but by them eating the mosquitoes when they're available, it helps also, it lowers the rate of people getting malaria and West Nile virus because they're the ones that are carrying those viruses.
Yeah, there was a study done a number of years ago at University of Michigan. Bat biologists and entomologists teamed up, and they found that bats could reduce the egg laying ability of mosquitoes, and they actually speculated that more work ought to be done on that kind of issue because bats might be having a big effect on malaria prevention in large parts of the world.
Yeah.
But, what's really happened since then is by scaring us that Ebola and SARS and COVID and a lot of other diseases, by speculating that they come from bats, we've put the attention off of where it should be.
Right.
The bats that were first speculated to be the most likely to be sources of Ebola, that species carries millions of tons of seeds annually all across Africa into clearings that need reforestation. And the loss of those bats could kill far more people than any danger coming from speculation that they might be a disease source. And in fact, the bats aren't. When a lot of money was invested in trying to prove that they were sources of Ebola, what they actually found was that they were so resistant to it that they probably didn't even have the capacity to be reservoirs.
That's crazy. Well, one thing I want to do before we finish, I want to give you a few accolades so people know who's on with me right now. I know that you're a fantastic, world-renowned photographer. You got one of your pictures in the 100 best pictures. There's a commemorative U.S. postal stamp for you. You've done a bunch of different things. And plus, let's talk about your book. So everybody that wants to learn more about bats, because you've got a book out there, or more than one maybe. And let's talk a little bit about that so people know that.
The Secret Lives of Bats is the book that I think most people would find most interesting. It tells a lot of fascinating stories mixed in with equally interesting information about bats. The Smithsonian has a book, Bats, an Illustrated Guide to All Species. There are 400 bat photos in it, all mine. And, if you're interested in bats, either one of those books would be very useful to you. And also the Bat House Builder's Guide. If you're interested in attracting bats to your yard, you might find that book to be worthwhile.
You've got a website, and it's in the description for you guys listening, but go ahead and give everybody your website, Merlin, so everybody knows that as well.
MerlinTuttle.org.
Right. Just you can go there, and there's all kinds of information on there. What have we left out? I'm sure there's a gazillion things we left out, but is there anything that we need to get out now?
Well, there's all kinds of interesting facts that we've left out. I mean,
let's go there.
Just for example, California leaf-nosed bat can survive for months at a time in America's hottest, driest deserts without drinking a drop of water. It has hearing so sensitive that it can hear the footsteps of a walking cricket. In the same area, in fact, right here in Texas, the pallid bat is immune even to the deadliest stings of scorpions and centipedes. There are just so many interesting facts. It's amazing. But in addition to that, many of these facts are very relevant to solving human problems. For example, when I was working on my last geographic article, a colleague that was helping me did some recordings of bat echolocation, how it bounced off of flower petals. There are flowers that provide special shaped leaves or petals that reflect echolocation in a manner that guides bats, just like airport landing lights guide
Wow.
pilots at an airport at night. And from the recordings that he did while with me, he went back and teamed up with some technological experts, and they're now finding that system of how the bats and plants interact to be very relevant to solving a problem they had with unmanned vehicles that need to read signs.
Yeah, like here in Austin.
And they can do it using discoveries of how bats and plants do it.
That's crazy. Well, I mean, Mother Nature knows a little bit more than us, I think.
Yeah, and there's so much we can learn from bats. They're incredibly sophisticated. But quite aside from what we can learn from them, we would be in big trouble without bats protecting our crops. They're worth at least $23 billion a year in the U.S. in crop protection. As I said earlier, here in Texas, they're estimated to be worth $1.4 billion annually in crop protection. Crops from corn, cotton, rice, coffee are all known to benefit greatly from bat pest control of certain insects. And I could go on, but I want to, in closing, express my deepest appreciation for those many people who have helped and supported my work as members. Together, we have saved some of the world's most important bat colonies, places like the bats in Congress Avenue Bridge, places like Bracken Cave near San Antonio. The bats from Bracken Cave alone eat more than 100 tons of insects in a single night. Imagine what Texas would be like if we hadn't protected that site.
Wow. So if people go to your website, is there a donation thing in there to be members with you and all that kind of thing?
Sure is.
Yeah. So go there, guys that are listening there. I've got one last question for you, Merlin. It's for people to help protect the bats. What's the bat? Give like 3 or 4 pointers that people can do to help protect these guys.
Well, bats need biodiversity. You hear that a lot, but most people don't understand fully what biodiversity is about. For example, where we have cleared vast areas and converted them to corn or cotton or soybeans or some other crop, we can't let nature help us in those places because bats and other animals that control insect pests naturally, just there's nothing for them. They can't survive out there. They don't have food or shelter in these big areas that we've converted to monocultures. We find that, for example, I'm working with pecan growers in Texas and Oklahoma now, putting up artificial bat roosts in orchards and attracting bats that can help reduce pest damage to pecans. And one of the things we've noticed is that we're much more likely to attract a lot of bats to bat houses when a pecan orchard is near a river than when it's not. And it appears that the river isn't just supplying water for them to drink, that what it's probably doing is there's a lot of natural diversity of vegetation. We leave along rivers because it floods and it's not a good place to build. And so in orchards that are near where you have that habitat diversity, we have the highest occupancy rates when we try to attract bats. If we want to live in a healthy environment with a good balance of nature where we don't use so many pesticides, we need to be much more careful about protecting diverse habitats. Not thinking that we can just bulldoze over everything that's natural and put something unnatural there and have a healthy future. You can also put up a bat house. If you're going to do that, get my book, The Bat House Builder's Guide. It will tell you all you need to know about attracting bats. Don't just go buy the cheapest bat house. I had a guy one time call me and complain that he didn't get any bats in his bat house, and I asked him about it, and he said, well, he got a really good deal on it. He got his bat house for $10. And I said, well, that's probably why you don't have any bats. It's not adequate. And he says, but I only paid $10 for it. And I said, well, it's more important that you could buy it for $10 than that you attract bats. Then congratulations.
You got a bat house, you just don't have any bats.
But especially if you live within a quarter mile or so of a river, you have greatly increased odds of success in attracting bats. And people that succeed in attracting bats, they enjoy watching their bats enough that most say, that they don't care what they're doing as far as eating pests. They're so much fun to watch that makes it worth having put up the house.
Well, I'm pretty close to the river. I may just do that. That sounds kind of cool. So let's close it up here, Merlin. As I mentioned earlier when we were talking, I always tell a silly animal joke for the crowd, and everybody that listens are already cringing because we know how bad they are. But as I always say, you've got kids, nieces, nephews, or you want to be on the show, please email me at mcov@forrealpodcast.com and I'll put you on. So Merlin, I've got a bat joke for you. You've probably heard all of them, and you may not have heard this one because it's so bad, but I've got it for you. So here it is. What do you call a crazy bat in a bell tower?
Well, we hear people say this guy's got bats in his belfry.
Well, that's close. This one is called a ding bat.
Oh, okay.
That's my deal. Hey, Merlin, most importantly, thanks so much for being on the show. I know you're busy, and I know we had a hard time getting this together because your schedule is so crazy, but you taking the time for everybody to hear your story, I really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much for that.
Well, and I very much appreciate your role in helping edify large numbers of people to information that is absolutely critical to a healthy future for all of us.
Well, it makes a big difference. Funny, I'm now the most interesting guy at drinking my tequila because of my bat now, but because of that. But lastly, to everybody else that's out there listening, first of all, keep telling people about these stories. Please keep listening, following. It's you guys are the ones that really make it possible for me to get great guests like Merlin, and please pass it on. But most importantly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for listening. For real.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.